that language. I think the content.
Commission to the dais, please. Commission to the dais.
Be careful to let people know that we're not creating something new.
I'm at the exit.
Madam Mayor, it's 6:01 and we're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this Tuesday, October 9th, City Commission work session to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo.
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell is absent for the roll. Commissioner Omari Hardy.
Here.
Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge. Vice Mayor, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, folks, we have a work session and there are 3 items on our agenda. Mr. Waters is here, along with other smiling faces. And we're going to move on first to item 3A, which is the discussion of Arts and Cultural Master Plan for downtown Lake Worth.
Good evening, William Waters, Community Sustainability Director. I want to introduce a couple of our members of our team to the Mayor and Commission. John Stover of Stover and Associates participated in generating the plan with Lord. Kathy Alex is the CFO of the Cultural Council. David Lawrence is the newly selected President and CEO of the Cultural Council. But we've been working together for almost 3.5 years on the Cultural Master Plan. The Mayor, as you may recall, you were one of the stakeholders, committee members. We've already presented an overview of the plan to both the Planning and Zoning Board and the Historic Resource Preservation Board. There'll be some comments made by the Cultural Council. And John's here to give you some overview toward the end about the implementation strategies that are available to us to help spur economic development and investment in the Cultural Arts District. So I'm going to go over the plan really quickly, and then we can get into questions later. But hopefully, this is just a short PowerPoint set up to give you an overview of the master plan itself. And the key entities that were involved with the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County, the Lake Worth Community Development Agency, and they couldn't be here tonight because they have a board meeting tonight, and the City of Lake Worth. The purpose of the plan was to elevate our quality of life and prosperity downtown, try to fill a talent gap, support and promote local artists, leverage the community's strengths, and act as a catalyst for ongoing economic investment in the community. This is the area of interest, which was the Cultural Arts District. You may recall this map from being included in the future land use element of the comp plan, and we established a cultural arts overlay. You've also had at a previous meeting a proposed zoning change of land development regulations that reflects the cultural arts overlay, which will be coming back to you for another workshop at some point later this year, early next year, in tandem with some other changes to the land development code. The process was 3 phases. The Mayor, you participated in the first phase quite heavily in the planning and research and analysis. There were a whole array of stakeholders and business interests and entities that were interviewed. There was a survey done. Then the compilation of the information was phase 2. And now we're in phase 3 where we actually have a draft. As I mentioned, it's gone before the Planning and Zoning Board for discussion and the Historic Resource Preservation Board. What we're doing tonight is giving you an overview of the plan. We do hope to move it forward as a formal adoption process in tandem with other comp plan amendments that are coming along. Because this is a fairly large encompassing area, it would be considered a large-scale plan amendment to our comp plan, and we can only do 2 of those each calendar year. So we wanted to tandem this with some other things that are coming, one of which you will hear about later this evening. So community engagement was very important. There were a series of interviews, workshops, and the survey, as I mentioned. There were public priorities established. And a vision for arts and culture in downtown came out of this collaborative enterprise. As we know, and the mayor often promotes, we are a mecca for artists and art lovers alike. We are where art is created, and the art that is created is sold in one of the largest art markets in the country here in Palm Beach County. We also recognize that Lake Worth is a diverse citizenry, reflecting a lot of backgrounds, a lot of interests, and we wanted to make the plan as inclusive of the various entities that are involved in cultural arts as possible. And so we established priorities, and there are 5 of those. One was to maintain and promote Lake Worth's unique character, which I think we have all been talking about, at least since I've been here. Retain and enhance downtown vibrancy, and that was an item that you all discussed several meetings ago, and what will be the important aspects to reinvigorate and strengthen downtown. Encourage greater arts and culture engagement and collaboration, improve the access to the arts and culture downtown, and then also strengthen public support for the arts and culture. So these are divided up into those 5 areas, and then what types of things can be done in order to make those 5 vision priorities come into reality. So each one is set up as an A1, 2, 3. Talk about the atmosphere downtown, celebrating the exposure of Lake Worth's multicultural communities, our ethnic diversity, leverage our character to our advantage, and enhancing existing market efforts to create a positive image for the city. And these are, some of them are feathered through other items that we go through with B, the retain and enhance downtown vibrancy, talking about a place to live in a community of arts, revitalizing the commercial enterprises, consolidating investment in downtown to reinforce the area. One of the aspects of that you'll be discussing, I believe, a week from Thursday, which is the parking study that has been done. Ensuring a robust economic anchor of special events. One of the new ones that we've created out of this whole study is Focus, which we'll be talking about at the end, which is at the end of November, beginning of December. And then we want to encourage the exploration of downtown. When we turn to encouraging greater arts and cultural collaboration among the various entities in the city, making the arts and culture more visible downtown was an important priority. Ensure a variety of affordable, attractive arts and culture offerings to appeal to the broadest array of interests and budgets possible. Cultivate our existing music scene, encourage collaboration between the various arts organizations, and also bring in other arts organizations that are in the county to have a stronger presence within the city itself. There was also a priority established to focus on youth. Also want to provide access to arts and culture downtown. As I mentioned, the parking study we'll be talking about next Thursday. Just so you know, I'll be out of town, so that'll be taken on by Juan and other entities, so I won't be here for that one. We're working toward a bike and pedestrian friendly community, which has been done through the CRA's bike paths, and this encouraged to be strengthened and broadened, and also expand safer roads. One of the discussions in this area has been doing something about Dixie Highway, as well as taking over eventually the ownership of Lake and Lucerne. Public support for the arts and culture. Increase and improve the coordination among our 3 entities, the city, the CRA, and the Cultural Council. I think the 3 of us have worked together fairly judiciously and in a well-concerted effort over the past 3 years. We've also brought in other entities. I will congratulate the Cultural Council for taking the lead on getting us the grant monies to put together this master plan. They were the heavy hitters for a while, and we have really appreciated their support in working with us, and as well as the CRA, to have this come to fruition. It has been kind of a long road. Help the other arts and culture organizations to increase diversity and build capacity, and then also promote and gain support for the downtown Lake Worth Arts and Culture Master Plan from the arts and culture sectors and a wider Lake Worth community, which would include Palm Beach County and the southeast region of Florida. The initiatives for investment and implementation. This is probably where you're of most interest. Enhance our existing promotional efforts. We've talked about the branding of Lake Worth, the marketing of Lake Worth. I know that the CRA, as well as the Cultural Council and Dolores Key in Economic Development and Marketing, we've been working quite hard for the past 6 or 7 years to identify Lake Worth as a brand and to promote that brand, and we are in discussions with our strategic plan envisioning how to broaden that appeal and further strengthen that brand identity in the region. Again, expose the broadest diverse cultures diverse populations to arts and culture within the city, and then take strides, as the mayor often introduces when she's speaking about the Lake Worth, as we are the community for the arts.
That's the.
The big the. Here's an item about the parking garage, which we'll be talking about our parking options next Thursday. Trying to consolidate resources and direct growth downtown. Some of the entities and interests that were discussed during the past 3 years were incorporated in our comprehensive master plan update that was approved back in June, that does focus on the cultural arts overlay and other incentives to attract investment downtown. And then we'll be talking about another option for investment encouragement later this evening. This is an area where Mr. Stover spent quite a deal of time identifying what would be the appropriate retail mix, the opportunity gaps, and where the infill implications would be. We'll let him speak about it a little bit more in a few minutes. But we already have a fairly strong food and beverage, arts and culture environment downtown. There were identified the various things that might be supported by a community of neighborhoods, and that came in the form of home furnishings, garden stores, and shoe stores. Were identified with the various stakeholders that those were things that Lake Worth needed. I think as we do encourage more investment in housing downtown, there will be a market to support those types of entities and to have the boutique shops that we already have grow and expand. We've often heard about the fact that Lake Worth is underserved by department stores. Department stores seem to be a thing of the past, so I'm not sure we're going to be able to actually encourage one to locate here, but you never know. And then also working on capitalizing various trends in retail. There is a retail strategies entity hired by the CRA that is marketing the downtown as well as the CRA area to try to close various gaps in the city's retail environment. And they were very instrumental in getting the collection of retail establishments in the new project just north of City Hall, where Starbucks and the urgent care facility are located. And then this is where I'm going to turn it over to John to look at some of the key implementation opportunities in the 4 areas that were identified for the short term.
Thanks, William. Well done. That was fast and right on. It's good to see you all. I think I've met at least a few of you. So to kind of top level thinking in terms of the way that we've thought about taking the findings and kind of merging that into recommendations, then specific actions for the city. What William has just talked about is kind of the background, the context. What are the priorities that we're trying to achieve? And I think of kind of the next cut of, well, what are those kind of strategies or action steps in order to achieve them? And then kind of the third bucket is, okay, now really specifically, who has to do what, when, with what funds to actually get there? And so the overall strategy gets further down the kind of chain of command than we'll go over here, but I did want to touch base on what we call key implementation opportunities. And what those are is, okay, we know the objectives that we want to reach. What are some of the more tangible strategies that are realistic, that are actionable, that are affordable, that the stakeholders have reacted positively to, and maybe most important, that there's actual people on the ground who are willing and able to execute and move forward on those different steps. And so, is there? Maybe let's jump to the next slide. Yeah. And so this is just kind of a little chart, kind of comparing how the kind of 4 categories of key implementation opportunities align with those goals. And I'll kind of briefly go through what those implementation opportunities are, and then we're happy to kind of answer additional questions and get more into the weeds on that. But there's kind of 4 main categories. The first is enhancing Lula to fit a number of different objectives. And it kind of came across very early on in the process that there is a lot of needs of different businesses that wasn't being achieved. And you have kind of disparate entities and parties. You have a commissioner and Commissioner Amoroso, who's both a business owner and a huge advocate for the businesses, but has kind of limited time and capacity to actually handhold everybody and coordinate activity. You have advisory neighborhood councils. You have, and what we hear time and again is folks don't know the specifics on, say, the street painting festival, or kind of have a common voice to be able to kind of then talk to Commissioner Amoroso and the rest of the commissioners and the different kind of entities in the city, and or help businesses kind of adjust for changing consumer preferences, conditions in the city, all those types of things. So a best practice is, okay, instead of forming some kind of support entity from scratch, is there the existing infrastructure that you can leverage to much more efficiently be that? And we are in a very good place in Lake Worth where we do have that entity. It's housed within the CRA in Lula, and the conceit would be giving it a little bit more ability to execute some of the action items in the strategy. So that's kind of the designated player to do some of those types of things. It will definitely require support from kind of all three partners in this project. And I think another key takeaway is that it needs to have kind of a two-pronged mission in order to be an advocate for the city, the CRA, and the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County, and that it needs to have a priority of both helping small businesses, kind of independent of the arts, just providing resources and coordination of small businesses in downtown, and it needs to have the priority of the arts in executing these strategies and more, and kind of being a coordinator in the city as well. So that's a tall order, and probably would ideally require a standalone full-time person, which we think is very doable, even given a context of limited resources in Lake Worth.
Commissioner Hardy, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. I guess why can't that be done, I guess, by having the CRA hire an additional person that's devoted to this? Why does Lula need to be spun off as an independent corporate entity?
Yeah, so the biggest reason is so that it's kind of independent from the functions of the CRA. This really needs to be the advocacy piece for businesses and for arts and culture, for the galleries, for the artists, and kind of play in the middle of that kind of triangle of all the different players. And as nice as it would be if you can kind of house that within an existing other type of entity, the reality is that it often doesn't kind of play out in that way. That's the shortest kind of answer I could. Yeah.
Under Florida statute, the CRA is somewhat limited in how it can expend its money and the activities it can undertake. Lula is already a separate entity, nonprofit, that was spun off as its own. I think it's the Lake Worth Renaissance something. And it's been the advocacy entity for basically the arts and also murals in the city. It has an ability as its own entity in of itself that it doesn't necessarily have to follow all the same rules and limitations that the CRA does. It can generate income. It can go out and solicit donations. It can have a broader appeal and marketing aspect than the CRA could. So even though it's housed at the CRA right now, it actually is already a separate entity. We've been discussing about making it much more broad and a bigger, playing a bigger role in economic development functions in collaboration with businesses already downtown.
Do you mind me asking if I can follow up?
Please.
Who then would be responsible for the governance of this? First of all, who is currently responsible for the governance of this separate body, and who would be if we were to? I mean, do we have control over this separate body right now?
No.
So what is it that we're supposed to do to help this body, which is apparently already separate and spun off from the?
Well, the goal of the plan is to set a groundwork and a framework by which the three of us, the city, the Cultural Council, and the CRA work together. And at some point, there is going to have to be private buy-in, and that is where the Lula entity comes into play, where it can have an advocacy role for encouraging investment from the private sector, can collaborate and work with the business owners that are already here to help strengthen their business plans and their investment opportunities. It can seek grant funding that maybe the CRA cannot. It is sort of managed by the CRA, but is separate, and part of the recommendation is to formalize making it more of a separate thing.
And I think
So it can act more independently.
Many of the conversations that we've had too in the past have been, unlike other cities that we've seen grow and flourish, they were not alone like we are. We don't have a chamber, we don't have a DDA, we don't have a downtown merchants group, we don't have a, we're trying to do this all ourselves, and every time one group emerges, another group emerges and eats up the other one, and then they all go. I mean, it hasn't been successful. We need, all the towns around us that have been successful and grown their business and their arts communities have all had nonprofit groups with its own staffs and people to help propel their cities forward. And what was cool about it, and you've heard me mention this at many meetings, they didn't step on each other's toes. This one knew, you know, if you look at Del Rey as an example, Old School Square had its own, and this one and that one, everyone knew to do the thing that they did, but nobody stepped on each other's toes, and they all worked together to do it. And that's how they got to make leaps and bounds. So I'm supportive of Lula. I know that they've already been doing.
Keep in mind, the CRA does sunset in about 12 and a half years, and we do envision the Lula continuing on after the CRA goes away. And hopefully it won't take us 12 years to get the Lula entity up to the strength and capacity that we need, but it gives us a breathing room of time to do that so that when the CRA ceases to exist, there will be a follow-up backup entity taking on many of the roles and activities the CRA had already started.
Vice Mayor?
And when we created Lula, we had the envision of like a DDA, something that would take it to the next level. And with Lula, the CRA has boundaries. Lula doesn't. So it can work citywide because we often said we'd like to do it over here. Oh, the city, it's outside the city's CRA boundaries. And we had always talked about having it as a separate entity with a separate board of directors, and that brings in all the shareholders. Have somebody from the Cultural Council, have somebody from the city, have somebody from the local arts, have local artists. You know, it's separate board of directors that would govern to move it forward.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think that's really a great answer to your question too, Commissioner Hardy, of like, how would this be different than existing CRA, where Lula has the exact same board of directors, it's the same board of directors as CRA, and then you'd have representation from the county, from the city, from the arts community that would be kind of lead drivers in addition to the CRA. And then one other thing, there's been a bunch of laws that so far have been forwarded in Florida, but it's not looking likely that they'll continue to be stopped. You're probably all familiar with this, but that would mandate that any entity within the CRA structure only can do programming related to real estate and properties. And if that was passed, then legally Lula couldn't exist as it is anyways. This would kind of conform with that as well.
Commissioner Robinson?
Restrictions sometimes are not good. And it's going to demonstrate all the work that Andy has done in the years with the downtown merchants. And I'm hoping they can do as good as you do.
Well, thank you. And real quick before I forget, William, can we get a copy of what's on the screen? Because it's different from what we're looking at. What's on the screen is not exactly what we're looking at. The same.
Surprising because that's what was loaded up.
Like that is not in our package right there.
Unless it's...
It's towards the back.
Is
Is
it
it?
towards
Yeah,
the back?
it's towards the back. Yeah, it's like the last thing in the pack.
Because I was trying to go in order.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just out of order.
I think they give us a report first, and then the
Okay.
presentation was.
There you are.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just out of order. Is that it?
There we go, sorry. Just mixed in with the full report.
It's,
We've gotten the full report, which is like 200 pages, and then you have a brief synopsis as an executive summary. You have this PDF, which is the PowerPoint didn't want to work with the font, so we made a PDF
Okay,
out
it
of it.
must just not be in order.
And you have a couple of other items, like an overlay map of the future land use element and also the cultural arts overlay map. All that was attached to the agenda item.
We had a little confusion over
It's a lot.
materials. No, we had a little, it was put in a different place and we overlooked it.
Madam Mayor.
Herman's still up.
Commissioner Robinson? Oh,
I
go
just wanted to ask when we were going to talk about music as an art, and the Bamboo Room and branding the varieties of music that are out there that could attract more people downtown as much as the arts, the other arts.
That will likely be an implementation step that's after the plan is put in place. Let's get into sort of a little bit too specific as to what the plan will generate, and that will be an item we'll likely bring back to you, or we can support when we bring back before you the discussion of the cultural arts overlay for the land development regulation update.
And that is when?
It's not scheduled yet because we ran out of meetings for you all. You all are a little thin on meeting time this rest of this calendar year.
That's an understatement.
We've been quadruple the amount of meetings every month.
Madam Mayor, real quick. And also on that note, food as art, it's always been
Thank you.
part of the CRA's direction. And when we were looking at 1000 Lake, we were talking about a whole food piece in the cultural piece.
You don't forget us
Yeah,
foodies.
exactly. Both of those items that can all kind of the cross section of different arts, especially the ones that are really kind of have good bones in the city, are all addressed. And there's kind of more specific strategies that could kind of conform to each of those.
Literary arts.
Should jump on to the next.
Yes, please.
All right. So the next kind of category of key implementation opportunities is enhancing the arts-oriented brand of the town with the big capital the place for artists to live in. It's interesting as kind of an outsider, and I've had this conversation with many of you in this room. Really, first of all, a really fascinating town. In terms of what artists are looking for, you want inexpensive real estate, which is all relative, but relative to other places near the shore, in the county nearby, this is inexpensive real estate. Great housing stock and great stakeholder support from every single angle for the arts community. Incredible infrastructure and bones for artists, from hobbyists to really legitimate, experienced artists of all different arts types. This is a fantastic community for artists. And I think that even though the city's done a good job in having, in relatively recent years, some marketing and branding kind of objectives, communicating that to both existing stakeholders and outside stakeholders could still use some work. And I don't know how many times I've heard, yeah, but utilities are so high here. Yeah, but it's so unsafe. Yeah, but there's nothing to do. And as an outsider coming in, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not, those things are not factually even correct anymore.
They're not.
But like there's a brand issue in Lake Worth, and I think there's a way to kind of envelop more pride and show why this is such a great place and why the arts is at the crux of that. And so
The old arguments are still playing out because of our inability to successfully brand
yeah,
the city. We've gotten through the humps because I think in some ways, being here for 7 years, we had to fix the city and start making the improvements that would improve the quality of life for people. We didn't want to brand it until we actually
that's right.
made progress in doing it. Now we're in a position where we're able to say, no, we see that every day, especially with the electric utilities. We're at a point now where we can say, no, it's not that anymore. And you don't know what it's an argument we should not be having because it's gone now. Now we feel a little bit more comfortable. Our timing is just a little bit off, but we've secured, I think, the answer and solution to a lot of the arguments. And that took a lot of work. It wasn't easy getting there,
I agree, and that has to come first because branding and marketing has to be sincere. If you're telling people that there's not expensive utilities, but there are expensive utilities, that doesn't work.
Correct.
But now that the city's kind of addressed
Yeah.
those issues, now's the push to communicate the gains.
Yep, I agree. Thank you, though.
So other kind of items within this include strategies for continued and enhanced promotion of events, for integrating arts use district, and William can talk about some changes that have happened there. Possible strategy for developing an artist in residence program, incentivizing the creation of additional spaces. Lots of other types of things are kind of addressed in the plan as well. Third category, key implementation opportunity, is promoting local arts diversity and increasing exposure. And part of what makes this town really funky and interesting is the truly remarkable diversity in every single kind of way that you want to cut it, permanent to part-time, ethnically, background, everything. And what you typically find in towns like that is it's really segregated by all those things as well. So there's a real opportunity and kind of a growing best practice, especially in the arts, is finding ways to kind of bring all that together and celebrate the arts as a tool to kind of bring cross exposure. And so a number of strategies that we talk about in here, including working with the schools to help bus not only students to the arts events that are happening throughout town, but including the parents, making these spaces that are comfortable. People have been, they realize that they're invited there. So that's on the kind of attendee side. But then there's these incredible artistic things happening in the Haitian Creole churches, the Guatemalan Mind Center, these different areas that a lot of folks outside of those communities aren't even privy to. And they're different and would provide value to everybody. So kind of giving that more of a stage, maybe bringing those to whether it's the Playwright Theater or other venues, kind of different types of cross promotion are some of the major kind of implementation opportunities within this category. And then the fourth and final category is encouraging and directing growth downtown. And in wherever you are, you have limited resources, competition for those resources. So it's where do you get the biggest bang for your buck? Where do you get the return on investment? The downtown area both has the bones of a really great place, a lot of opportunity to enhance that, and some of the limitations of the commercial district relate to a relatively low density for towns like this. And we do retail studies all the time in terms of viability, in terms of market demand. Two of the things that are lacking in Lake Worth is population density nearby and an office daytime population. And so you're kind of limited. You're really, needing to draw outsider folks to come in. And so the more that you can kind of increase density, everybody wins. The arts community gets more enhanced, more spending coming in. Same thing with the businesses in downtown Lake Worth as well.
How do you balance the demographic? I mean, that has been our challenge when you mentioned earlier about retail and different types of businesses that we seek. When we still have, the very richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor, those numbers. I mean, I've always said in past at commission meetings that, when somebody comes to go visit their Aunt Tilly in South Palm Beach and goes over to her condo and happens through our city to do it, they say, where is this? This is Eden. You know what I mean? This is amazing and this is great. And they learn about us there. But if you were Joe pencil writer in Chicago looking at a demographic study of where to put your next one of this store or that store, you're not going to, until you happen upon us.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a harder lure.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it depends on what land use are you talking about. So that relates to bringing different types of retail and activity and amenities on the commercial side. Mm-hmm. That relates to bringing potential office users, which I think may or may not be in the work. The CRA is doing some really great work in terms of working on that side of the equation, and relates to the residential density as well.
Commissioner Robinson?
I just had a question in all this effort and money, which is coming from the CRA directly. City budget is going to be involved?
Well, like I mentioned before, it's a collaborative effort, and we have already been talking about how to implement pieces of it. There are areas of focus among the budgets of not only the city, but also the CRA, the Cultural Council, to look at how to implement pieces of this and to attract the types of investment that we would like to have. And so I don't have a number of what it will be affected, but there's little pieces here and there, like Focus, the 3-day event, is a investment not just from the city, but also from the Cultural Council and the CRA. We want to make that be a signature event. We're going to try to create collaboratively among us, at least 4 signature events a year.
My real question was, can we invest in our schools in terms of art and instruments and art activities?
That can be, and there are a number of grant opportunities that the Cultural Council oversees. I believe, and I sit on one of the grant panels, I'm hoping I'm not speaking out of turn, it would appear that the capacity of the public schools in Lake Worth are not overly geared toward applying for some of those grant funds, and entities that are involved in those schools aren't up on what resources are available and which ones can be utilized. There are a number of schools and nonprofit.
So the answer is you're going to be working with the schools too,
it
as
may
well
be
as downtown?
Not only working with the school, we're working with the nonprofit entities that already have a presence in various schools to broaden their presence to incorporate and embrace the schools in Lake Worth.
With money?
I'm not promising your money to anybody. I don't have that wherewithal.
There's going to be, when we have the school board in here too, there's also a huge effort in the meetings that we're going to be having with the school board to add and encourage music and the arts in our schools. It's a new focus, and I think that's going to be a part of our presentation that we have with them as well. And the other thing about Lula is Lula has the ability, which is something that we don't do right now very well or thoroughly, because we don't have a position created for that, is we don't fundraise. Most cities they have the investment of their local car dealerships and their businesses and shops and people. They spend money you know, to support events and things that are happening. Lulu will have the ability, along with its nonprofit status, to be able to fundraise and bring money forward for its budget.
So when we're with the school board, we can say that that's going to be part of our emphasis?
Well, I know that Erica Whitfield, when she was here last time, she mentioned specifically about getting instruments to music programs or grants that they were going to be applying for through the school board. I don't know what that has to do with y'all or if you're working together on that, but I know she mentioned something about that. But I know that that's a priority that she was going to talk about, I think, in reference to it, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, but Commissioner Hardy?
Yes. So you said that we have a relatively low population density for towns like ours, for towns trying to do what it is that we're trying to do. And I guess I have two questions that are related to each other. First of all, what measure of density did you use? Did you just look at population density in terms of number of people per square mile, or did you look at residential density in terms of number of residential units per acre? And in addition to that, how did you come to the conclusion, this kind of evaluative conclusion, that we didn't have enough density, and to whom did you compare us? And then a third would be, where do you think we should be in terms of density according to whatever metric that you used?
Mm-hmm. So those are fantastic questions. We did market analysis like towards the beginning, like 3 years ago in the town. And to tell you the truth, I don't remember the specific. I was the one that did it, and I don't remember the specific metrics either. But there's no such thing as, in my mind, as enough density or the right type of density. There's a small rural town, a huge big city. What's to say what's right or wrong? But what there is kind of implications or ramifications. And so, you think about there's a certain amount of spending at certain types of retail categories or arts categories, and you can, to really increase that pie, you can either kind of within that pie have certain areas to, kind of allocate the existing spending a little differently.
When you say spending, what do you mean? You mean consumer spending?
Yeah, exactly.
Which comes from the number of people living in the town.
Exactly. It's right. Okay. Exactly. And so here, this is a lovely town, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing to say that there needs to be more density or that anything has to change. But if there's more downtown vibrancy, if there's going to be more, shops doing even better, what it takes is more spending to do that. And so there's a number of ways that can happen. And again, it doesn't have to happen, but that's where the density would come in. And that seems to be kind of part of the takeaway here. Is continue to kind of, continue that trend of kind of vibrancy and of businesses and the arts community kind of thriving, particularly in the downtown area.
So if I heard you correctly, what you're saying is that there's no such thing as density good or bad. What you're saying is that there's density good if what you want is X, Y, Z, A, B, C, right?
Yeah.
And it appears that when we go through that list of things that we want, it would appear that we need more dollars to come from somewhere. And that somewhere comes from more people being in our town.
That's right. And the two big ones.
If we want to achieve some of our objectives.
Exactly.
Okay.
One of those items, for me, kind of seeing the conditions, and I talk a lot about kind of the different elements that kind of create that retail vibrancy and sustainability. There really is a lack of daytime consumer population in Lake Worth for very obvious reasons, that there's just not a ton of people living right there, and there's not a ton of office workers leaving during lunch. And again, nothing wrong with that, but that's a limitation where if those are some items where if that were to grow those populations, then that really helps support local businesses even more.
I appreciate it. And I think you answered it, actually. I think you answered it. Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I just had a comment and a request. We have a new executive director for the Cultural Council now, and maybe we want to go and spend some time with you, and you update us on exactly what you're doing, because things are changing all the time. But I know that you're doing, I watch busloads and busloads of students, young children, older children coming in. I know that you have a great music arts piece. I know that you give millions and millions of dollars all over Palm Beach County to schools and nonprofit organizations. So maybe we can do that with you soon, where you invite us in and we bring our staff and maybe Erica Whitfield, and we just go over exactly what you're doing. and why you're doing it, and maybe, you know, things that you need us to take to the next level as we build the partnership. I spent, you know, lots of time today at Highlands with Erica and the new principal at Highlands, and one of the things we got to see was their music program, and the children, you know, 3rd grade they started, and, you know, they were talking about the partnerships with the Cultural Council and things that they've learned along the way. So, you know, maybe we just need to be updated a little bit more, because I know that there's a lot of things that you do that, you know, I say, oh my God, I didn't know they were doing that.
Exactly.
And so I think that we just need, you know, new director, a new set of eyes, and we need to be educated on some of the things that are going on right here in our own city.
And we're your biggest advocate too. So for us, the more we know, the better we can do. We're so used to being scrappy and handling everything ourselves and trying to fill in and fill the holes that need plugging, you know, for so long, that now that we have help
And
and partnerships, you know, we need to know when to step back and say, okay, this isn't my wheelhouse, this to do it. But as you know, I'm sure from being in Lake Worth, the time that you have been, we tend to step in and jump in whenever somebody needs something. So we'll have to learn how to, you know, the more information you give us, the more we'll be able to let you do what you do, and you assign us to what holes you need us to go fill.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'd say that just about covered what I was planning on talking about. I think a couple just of examples on the directing growth downtown that don't cost the city necessarily dollars. Actually, one of these two does, but the CRA has been working, and a lot of these kind of recommendations, again, have evolved over the last couple of years, and so a lot of them have actually either been recently enacted or kind of in the works in different ways. One, you know, there's been talk in the city about building municipal parking garage, and so the CRA and some things that kind of came of this and that we recommended is don't do that in isolation. Use that in, you know, in a public-private partnership to, you know, have shared spaces, to, you know, have private dollars help build that as well, but kind of both, you know, that leveraging a development that wouldn't be able to happen without subsidy, and also a parking garage that wouldn't be able to happen without the private subsidy. And another is, and the city just went through, and William can, I'm sure, get into more detail in terms of some zoning changes and updates. And one thing that the CRA has paid a lot of mind to is that on the enhanced density front, there's not much opportunity for that because of the small size of different parcels. And so there's a, in a kind of very specific area, kind of near the downtown area, I think it's sustainable bonus incentive program, but in essence, there's incentives for land assemblage, which allows for the type of density, or helps encourage, you know, without kind of public dollars, incentive to create the preconditions to allow for development that creates a little bit more density right by the downtown area.
Commissioner Robinson?
I know we're talking about culture, but density related, have they seen Lake Worth related in West Palm? Yeah. And, you know, I just saw in the paper the other day that it was on 2.5 acres, they were going to build 87 units, no higher than 4 stories. Is that possible somewhere in Lake Worth?
That is possible.
Where?
Downtown, we allow 40 units per acre as a baseline, so 2.5 acres could have 100 units. We also have a mechanism to facilitate that 40 units an acre going to 50. So in 2.5 acres, you can have 125 units. So we do have the
Does Related know that?
Related. We have. Yes, in a broad sense. One of our challenges, and there's 3 different areas that John didn't mention, but they did look at. We are missing the boat in 3 areas. One is that we are not able to capitalize as much as we could on the tourism visitor because we don't have a hotel.
Yeah.
We're working on that. We've been working on that. The other area is that we need to work collaboratively to try to encourage the increase of household income within our community, because our household income size and income is very low compared to the rest of the county. And the other aspect is to encourage people to live in the city and move into the city who have the disposable means to support the types of uses and retail and office that we'd actually like to have in the city. So that we identified those 3 needs in our comp plan.
And that has increased.
That has increased. We have put in place a number of mechanisms to help encourage those who are existing in the cultural arts community to stay here, grow their business, incubate their business, become a larger business. Some of that is worked on by the grants that are given by the Cultural Council. Others are facilitated by the CRA and the housing that they build. But back to the question about, there are incentives and related. The issue with Lake Worth is to assemble those properties in order to do that development is a challenge. CRA has recently acquired 2 assemblages actually 3, that should hopefully facilitate a larger, more dense project. You're aware of their assemblage of properties west of Dixie Highway between Lake and Lucerne along E Street. They've also assembled some properties at 17th Avenue North, right next to the Mid project that's coming, that went to the Planning and Zoning Board last week. There's about 2.5 acres they've assembled there. And then you've also helped facilitate their assembling some properties between L and M along First Avenue South. Related has a difficult time making the numbers work for a smaller or mid-sized project. If you look at their portfolio, they have hundreds of thousands of units and acres. And Lake Worth, the cost for them to come in and assemble amount of land they would like to see make a performer work is not favorable at this time. Hopefully it will be. The numbers of development entities that I've spoken with or have some relationships with, many of them have already expended quite a deal of money on getting projects entitled or buying up land. Now the market is kind of at the higher end, and development entities are being more cautious on where they are investing in assembling properties because of the fear they may have to carry it or hold it for some time before the economic climate is as ripe as it could be or should be for them to develop that project. We're going to have to get over that hurdle. And 2 of the items we have coming next are some incentives that we're going to propose that will hopefully speed up and make Lake Worth a more attractive investment because these types of incentives are not offered by other cities.
Commissioner Hardy?
I'm sorry. Could I see if I understood what you just said? What you just said is that a lot of companies that are known around here for doing development have a bunch of projects elsewhere already, that they have a large backlog, right? And that they potentially fear a coming recession, and that they don't want to invest in especially risky areas unless and until they can clear their backlog.
That and the cost of construction is at a very, very high point right now.
And there's a razor thin margin here between the cost of construction and the marketability of whatever it is that you would construct.
Yes.
Especially when you add land assemblage and parking. The cost of,
not just the land assemblage, but also the carrying cost, the entitlement process, all of that. Now, we do have, as you're aware, a number of things facilitated in our land development code that make the carrying cost about as short as it possibly can be in the development arena. We'll talk about it more when the mid comes to you, which I think is the end of the month. But we do need to have some successes under our belt to attract other investment. Mm-hmm. I believe we have had a backlog of interest in the city, all predicated on what's happening with the Gulf Stream. Mm-hmm. And that's the question I'm asked almost by every single person I meet with. What's the story on the Gulf Stream? And I don't have a clear answer as of yet. We're either going to have to force that to happen. Hopefully there will be something happening in the next couple of months and get that behind us, because there were a number of initial investments in the city several years ago, and the mayor's very well aware of this. They were promising they would be open by the season no later than the season we just lost.
Correct.
And it didn't happen. So a number of businesses couldn't hold on any longer. They left because there was no visible improvement at the Gulf Stream. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus intentionally. It's just there was a lot of hype around that private investment, and unfortunately it did not happen.
Again, just to reiterate, private investment, not city-owned property. It's a lot of people don't understand that when they mention this. It's not, the city doesn't own it. It doesn't have the right to do anything other than enforce the laws and codes and things that we have on the books for. This is a private project that we stood behind and supported and did everything we could to help it move forward, but ultimately it's a private project. But I do hear good things mumblings. So let's.
While we are here, I did want to give David an opportunity to introduce himself and give you a little bit of his backgrounds. I do think he brings a new, fresh eye to the Cultural Council and has some innovative ideas, especially when it comes to children's education and the broadening of the culture, and his already initial experiences in Lake Worth.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. I want to say congratulations to the city for this work so far. A city of this size to be undertaking a cultural plan is pretty exciting. And I think, as John mentioned earlier, one point that I think is really important is there is already such a sense of authenticity here. You have artists here that appreciate this as a place to create and exhibit work and perform, and that's half the battle. So a lot of what is in the plan is ways to strengthen that and entice and encourage more artists to relocate here. A lot of my work in Indianapolis was around developing cultural districts. I come from the Arts Council of Indianapolis. I was the CEO there I was at the Arts Council for 20 years and CEO the last 9. And
did a great job.
oh, thank you.
I love India, no place came back to something awesome.
Well, there you
in
go.
the chambers.
And I did not even know she was here, so that's great. So, yeah, so
She's a plant. No.
I love it. No, I did not. But that work is important when you're trying to attract tourists and businesses, and a lot of the work that we're doing at the Cultural Council will help to make that even more so. And so we appreciate the partnership with both the CRA and the city, and we look forward to working with all of you to see this exciting plan sort of move forward.
Well, the good news is that it's not just an arts district, but the whole city is.
Right.
Even though we have it mapped out, the way that we do for, say, Lula, but the whole city is that way. And that was the one thing that really charged me when I first getting involved with, to say, hey, it's organic here. It's not contrived. We're not creating a Disney World in the middle of, it's
Right.
to say, hey, Zam, you're an arts district. You know what I mean? It's already kind of there. So the bones are there. Also, being as small as we are, we have the ability to transform quickly.
Right.
And be a great test subject for a lot of the plans and a lot of the new techniques that are going on as people start to revitalize arts districts and enhance the arts. So I think our size actually is helpful to us.
Right. And I think for the arts sector, probably the most important thing about survivability right now for the arts in general is to be more equitable and inclusive in everything that we do. So one of the things that I appreciated with a set of fresh eyes coming into this community and seeing that diversity and inclusion were baked into this plan, an important part of it, I think speaks to the importance of this work that we need to do collectively to make sure that the arts survive and our cities survive. Something that you'll learn about me is I really do believe that the arts are for all, and we need to do everything we can to encourage that development. So I look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And that's it, unless you have other questions.
Do you have a question, Vice Mayor?
Just real quick, my request goes back. We don't have any of these flyers. Can you get it to Selena and have her get it to us? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item 3B, discussion of the Economic Investment Incentive Program.
Isn't there a good part to this Lula thing?
Nope.
I see 4 here, and the title says related to the Prime Master Plan objective.
We've already done it.
I'll shut up. I'll learn.
No worries. Is there a 5th item, William, that we're missing?
There were, I have not seen what was presented to you in paper form. I just know what was loaded into agenda.
5
In the
objectives.
title, it says 5 objectives, and there are only 4 listed. That's why.
That's
Oh.
the 5 at the bottom, A, B, C, D, E.
Oh, ABC are the objectives. Thank you.
Right. The implementation opportunities, where there were 4 opportunities to implement the 5 objectives.
Right. Okay, thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item B, the discussion of the Economic Investment Incentive Program.
As you may recall, we did an economic investment incentive for the MIG project, which is the 230-unit apartment complex that is moving through the entitlement process now up at 16th and 17th Avenue. It brought to light, we'd already been discussing some ideas of how best to enhance the economic climate in Lake Worth, how to encourage private investment, and knowing that Lake Worth did not have any financial outright dollars to give projects, unlike the CRA can throw in land, it can do a TIF differential on taxes. It has some seed monies that can be utilized for entitlements or infrastructure. We discussed what can the city do, and our first step several years ago was to have the quickest entitlement process that we could create, which in some terms is as little as 75 days and as little as 125, which is the fastest I know of south of Orlando. And I don't know a whole lot about what happens north of Orlando. It's an area that I'm afraid to go into sometimes. But anyway, it has been much appreciated by the development groups that is a very fast process. But we're also noticing that there is, because of the risk that is involved in initially investing in Lake Worth, some developers would like to have a little bit more of a skin in the game from the city. And so we proposed a incentive program based around the new revenues coming into the enterprise funds of the city, which there are 4, the largest of which is the electric utility, the water utility, the sewer utility, and the stormwater. So we've created, through this program, a unique investment incentive, unlike anything that I know of that's in Florida, and possibly one of the more unique ones that is actually in the country, by saying, if you come into the city and you generate new revenues for our utilities, we will give you part of that back up front in order to get your project over the hump and get it into the works. So essentially, and I won't go through all the particulars until the end, we looked at a program that looks at either the 3 to 5 year revenue stream in those 4 areas, electric, water, sewer, and stormwater, and looked at, based on the rate structure, how much could we comfortably give back to a developer at 4 different time frames in order to encourage the development to happen. So with the MID project, it was identified that 25% of the electric revenue could be given back to them over a 3-year period. So 25% of the anticipated new revenue coming into the electric utility will be going back to the MID at 4 different time frames as their development process. The first disbursement, and this will be for all 4 utilities, will be at the time the entitlement process is finished. The project is entitled to move forward to go to permitting. The next stage would be at the time they actually submit their full application for a building permit. The third payment would come at the time that the building permit is issued, and the last payment would happen when they get a CO or certificate of occupancy for their project. There are some protective mechanisms in the program. If there's a revenue shortfall, for whatever reason, we've underestimated what the project will generate, the developer has to do a performance bond or some other mechanism to make up that difference. If the project performs better than we anticipated, the city keeps the whole difference. They don't actually give more money back to the developer. There are some other things that were put in place in this proposal that if there are items such as the use of all gas appliances, we do reduce the electric incentive because that would likely reduce the revenue stream coming in. Due to some occurrences when we don't have a rate tariff for photovoltaic or electricity generating projects, we have eliminated the electric incentive for projects that incorporate either photovoltaic or solar systems in their performer, because we're going to probably need the revenue generated to possibly buy their electrons that are created by their systems. The program will be evaluated on an annualized basis, and based on the rate structure that is studied for the 4 utilities at each budget year, that incentive may vary. It may be less than 25% next year, seeing how electric works, but in no way will it exceed 25%. So based on what was already studied for this fiscal year, the proposal was 25% for electric, 2.5% each for the water, sewer, and the stormwater. And that's over a 3-year period. As we move forward and we get some projects behind us, we may extend that revenue period from a 3-year to a 5-year program, and we may adjust those rates. But again, that will be looked at, and those will be incorporated as part of the rates, the resolution for rates and charges, which is adopted each year as part of the annual budget process. And it's applicable to planned developments. This is again an incentive for people to assemble a larger project. It is not just for every little project that comes in. Urban plan development has to be a half an acre. A plan development, mixed plan development, or urban plan residential plan development must be 2 acres if it's east of 95, And then those same types of amenities must be 5 acres west of 95. So those are the opportunities, and the mid being the first one. So when those projects come through for their approval ordinance, which is different than a traditional site plan approval, the incentives will be incorporated at that time as part of the development agreement that is generated as part of the ordinance, which is being developed. And we'll have more information on this when you see the mid later this month and again in November. But I believe it's a very aggressive incentive. It does not cost the city any outright dollars at the beginning to help encourage investment in the city. The other component of it is that numbers of projects, and the mid being another one, needed infrastructure improvements in order for them to be successful. If the city has already adopted in its capital improvement plan a schedule for infrastructure improvements, those can be sped up, and the developer takes on the responsibility to build that infrastructure, and the city will pay them back, but only if that infrastructure money is already been approved in your 5-year capital improvement plan. Otherwise, that would have to be a separate negotiated type element because the funds would not necessarily be there. So that's the other piece. Not all projects are going to qualify for that. Either there won't be money available, it will not be a capital improvement project, or there may not be any need for infrastructure to be improved. So we do think that the initial revenue stream ones will be the more popular aspects, but the mid coming forward is, and you've already approved this, has 2 aspects. One that's based on revenue, and one is based on both water, sewer, and electric infrastructure that was already in the capital improvement plan.
Commissioner Robinson?
I congratulate you on your creativity. I mean, really, I'm hoping it works. I certainly hope it works. I'm concerned that it's the incentives might limit our own ability to invest in ourselves. We've raised the rates on all those funds that we're giving incentives to. So we've raised the rates so that we could give incentives. But then we talk about solar, minimizing solar. And if we're going to be the green city that we are, I want to be honest in being able to tout the interest in our greenness. Does Related know about this, all these incentives?
It's not in place formally yet, and once we do, Dolores and I are working on a marketing piece for it that describes both some of the incentives that were put in the comp plan, as well as the third item we're going to talk about tonight, as well as this one, and those will be distributed, and it's also going to be discussed at our envisioning presentation on November 29th. Our design competition that kicks off the Focus celebration that's pre-Art Basel.
I just, I'm looking forward to your success, but the giveaways mean that we're going to be bringing in less, but you got to give to get. So.
Well, we look at it in this stance that these projects not being here, we wouldn't have the revenue otherwise. Yeah. And unless a project comes in and brings revenue to the city, there is no incentive given.
We need to sell it.
Mr. Hardy?
Yes. I would also like to congratulate your creativity. I'm wondering if we can get even more creative. My first question is, in order to get this, you need to do either a UPD or a PD, or some sort of mixed-use development that fits the square footage criteria, or a residential plan development that fits, right? Okay. So theoretically, you could get this without having a mix of uses at your project.
Right. The mid does have some mix of uses. Most of the locations where this is applicable requires a mixed use component already, but it is conceivable that a straight residential project would qualify.
Could we encourage the very best behavior by making this available only to projects of mixed uses? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the concerns I have is that we do need housing at a greater rate than we need commercial, retail, and office.
Sure.
And I'll give the best example is West Palm. The DPZ downtown master plan, that's Joanna Powder-Zybert master plan that I was involved with, I will say that, back in the early 90s, required every project in downtown West Palm to be mixed use.
Doesn't work.
Developers were reluctant because they were building space. There was no market for it first. And some of the buildings that were originally built are just now seeing some of those spaces filled. A very good example is Related's a condominium building right across from City Place. None of that commercial space has ever been built out or leased. So I do not feel like comfortable imposing upon developers saying you must provide this type of space or your project can't happen, because the private sector often knows better what will make a project work.
Well, if I can push back just a bit, this is not a requirement in the zoning code that your project be of a mixed use. This is a requirement if you're going to use city tax dollars that your project be of mixed use. Mixed use projects obviously, you know, enhance walkability. They put commercial uses right where people live. You know, live work has been a traditional aspect of cities. And I guess my thing is, if we're going to provide the incentive, we obviously have some requirements. I would just like us to consider potentially saying that if you're going to take tax, and in some cases this can be, I mean, in the case of the mid, it's over $1 million.
Okay, well, hold on. That's a difference. This is not, what we're talking about tonight is not tax revenue.
Well, okay, so I shouldn't say tax revenue. City funds.
It's enterprise funds. It's not, nothing that affects the general fund.
City funds.
Okay.
The enterprises are under the city's umbrella.
Yes.
Okay, so I shouldn't say tax dollars. It's just, I think we should consider making the criteria a little more specific. That's all. I guess my next thing is on the second page here in E, where it says, except as set forth herein, the incentive amount under the program shall be based on a set percentage established each fiscal year in the city's annual adoption of the citywide resolution of fees and charges. Are you saying that we're basically going to set, it's a little bit higher than that, E? Are you basically saying that every year there's going to be a maximum amount total that will be available for incentives?
It's not a maximum amount. What we're doing is that due to the revenue streams, there are provisions when it comes to bond covenants and payment of various expenses out of these utilities. Mm-hmm. Depending on how those utilities are operating and doing, we may be able to provide more of an incentive versus less. Right now, there is no cap on how many projects would come in and apply for this because it's all based on new revenue. If we were to get a very large number of new projects in, the revenue, the health of those utilities may be better, such that the percentage of anticipated revenue being able to be given back to them might be a little bit greater. And so we do want to evaluate it on an annualized basis because we may have years where it's not doing so well, and we're like, okay, well, we still want to provide the incentive, but we can only do 15% out of the electric utility this fiscal year, and versus a 25%.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. On the sheet here, it says 20% for the electric utility. When you go down to H subsection I, in your comments you said 20. Excuse me. In your comments you said 25.
We gave 25 to the mid. This number can be reevaluated. This has not come forward for your approval. This is just a discussion item. Yeah. There was very little leeway in that, and the complete rate structure had not been finished. We do now have a rate structure for FY19 that is I believe, a little more supportive of a 20% incentive versus a 25.
Okay, and then my last question is for section J. So we have this incentive that says, look, if you're a commercial ratepayer at the electric utility and you create, I believe it's 10 jobs, then you get basically a discount once we verify that you've created the jobs, right? And so basically what you're saying is that if you are going to avail yourself of this incentive, you cannot avail yourself of that incentive. Is there a need to make that choice? To force that choice, or can they have both?
You can't have both because the first year of incentive under the economic development incentive, which you're talking about, is 25%. So you either get it after you've been in operation for a year and generated the 10 equivalent jobs and the 150 kW of new load, or you're getting it up front by the developer. The developer would make that choice because in many aspects of the office end of it, that incentive is going to the tenant, not the developer. And this is to try to encourage the development to happen from the very beginning. If a developer is moving forward and has an office component, the office component could be split out, and the developer could say, well, in those pieces, I'd like to reserve that economic incentive which Dolores manages to go to the tenants when they come online versus my taking it upfront as part of the entitlement process. So that is negotiable.
Dolores has it. Dolores?
And to speak to that, 150 kW is very difficult to meet. The 10 jobs, not so much, but that's normally for El Bodegón or a large user of electric. It's not just an air conditioner. So that's usually for your large developer that is going to meet the criteria of the economic development incentive electric rate. It's not going to be for your housing. No one would really meet that criteria for housing.
Does a restaurant meet that criteria?
No, they don't meet that 150 kW.
With all the electric and air conditioning and refrigeration units and all that?
A really large restaurant, they normally don't meet that criterion that was enacted.
No, I was just going to say thank you for answering my questions.
Vice Mayor?
Have we had anybody fall into that category?
Thus far, El Bodegón is in their 3rd year of meeting that criterion.
Okay, so El Bodegón got it as a business.
Right, and they have 75. We probably this year will have 2 more users, 2 more people from the Park of Commerce come in.
Okay.
William, what legally is in store if the project fails? What protection is built into this?
There's a requirement to have a performance bond so that
Performance bond.
if it doesn't go forward, then we get paid back and we will collect on that.
Okay.
And it's something we're going to, Mark Stivers, who's here as a Deputy Director of Community Sustainability, we are working with the Attorney's Office to more formalize the performance bond aspects of many of our projects to ensure that what the developer says is going to happen will happen, and if it doesn't, we collect.
I'd like to see if we move forward with this, that we get a copy of that to review before the,
Okay.
And then the other thing too, because they're in a CRA district, we're in the CRA district, when we give these incentives along with getting less tax money, because we share the tax money in the CRA district, I mean, the numbers all run and jive for the first 3 years of the project? You said 3 years is the duration of the?
Now, these projects, any project that qualifies for an urban plan development, mixed plan development, residential plan development can qualify. There are areas that are not in the CRA that do qualify for this. All of Lake Worth Road, the projects on either side of that could qualify. Those on 10th Avenue North, west of 95. Those on 6th Avenue South, west of 95.
So throughout the whole city, not just within that
It's throughout the
district.
whole city.
Okay.
Just some areas of the city, you could probably never amass enough property. It's a little bit of a challenge east of Dixie Highway, though it's not impossible, but you can do an urban plan development there.
A lot of people don't realize that to acquire the amount of property that we're talking about, you may have to encounter 5, 8, 10, 15 different owners on different parcels to actually put together the types of property, depending where in the city that you're looking at. It's not like there's 4 land barons in Lake Worth and they all own 10 acres apiece or whatever. It's not a suburban community. There are multiple owners of small pieces, and you may have a piece here and a piece here, and then this piece here is owned by 3 different owners in the middle and not have the whole piece. So accumulating in the city based on the small lots that we have and the history.
Well, keep in mind, a half an acre is basically almost half of one city block. 2 acres, you're right at an entire city block. And then 5 acres is 5 acres. That's like 2.5 city blocks. So we did reduce the size of the requirements for the plan developments in an LDR change, I think twice recently. And so it for the project of the size to really make an impact in the city, it needs that half an acre to actually be able to have a big enough impact from a size standpoint, because many of our smaller lots, you just cannot maximize their use and highest and best use because the land area is not there to facilitate an economically feasible building
But
or
then with
project.
a half an acre, you still have to deal with parking. And depending on how much you want to build at that point, then you need.
And it's not impossible. I've been doing some of my own creative other studies that you'll see later on how to get a parking garage on half an acre and an 80 room hotel.
Really?
Creativity.
All right, Mr. Magician.
Now, I'm not saying it's economically the most inexpensive building to build, but it's not impossible.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, I just wanted to say that the money goes into the CRA, it still comes back to the city.
Right.
And
No, I meant from the economic standpoint of losing the 3 years of utilities. Sorry.
and the investment, the development of the mid doesn't supplement the lack of development at the Gulfstream. In other words, the mid is residential development, fantastic, and people still want the Gulfstream as an excuse not to
Well, I
come
don't say
in.
it's an excuse.
Does that prioritize the importance of tourism versus, residential emphasis?
You're looking at two things that may not be, that may be mutually exclusive. The demonstration that someone can come in the eastern part of the city and make a significant investment and make it a success helps tourism, helps the Gulfstream, helps any other future investment. The mid being successful is imperative that can be proven because they're taking a risk. That's why there is as much interest from the CRA in the city as there is for that project. It will only bode well for the person trying to do the Gulfstream in order to get financing. Those who are making the excuse that they don't want necessarily to move forward until the Gulfstream happens are either looking for those tourism population who's not here or the residential population who's not here yet. So it's easier to sort of point at the Gulfstream than it is the mid, because right now the mid is a great big vacant lot with nothing on it, and it hasn't been overly promoted that it's coming. But the Gulfstream is an edifice that's been there for almost 100 years, and we've been waiting for about 15 for it to get fixed.
I think more to it though is the quality, having quality rentals. You know what I mean? To have market rate quality rentals in the community, being the basis for the mid, being close to the West Palm Beach area. It's on the northern section of the town. To be able to have amenities, good amenities, concierge workspace, whatever. Those types of things are not reliant as much on the Gulfstream. The Gulfstream is more for the downtown investment, and a lot of the eyeballs that came in from all over the country looking at investments in the downtown, they were looking at the Gulfstream. I mean, me coming before being mayor, coming from the PR committee for the CVB, Convention and Visitors Bureau, that was goal number one. Like I said, it's a private project, and we can't, I can't whip out my wallet and buy it and say, all right, let's go, people, let's get this thing up and running. But that was goal one, to get that thing going. Because we know that we've had, people that have come in and said, that goes up, I want to build another hotel downtown, I want this, or I want to look at that, but they're looking at that. So I think it more affects the downtown investment than it has the city's investment, because you're seeing, from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of professional people, young couples, not looking to buy homes right now, that are looking for quality, decent rate rentals with amenities that we really don't have a lot of in this community.
I just wanted to not emphasize, but have tourism equal to development, density residential.
Sure, feet on the street is all,
That's
always
getting
good.
those feet on the street is the cure to a lot of the things that ail us, really. From residents to visitors. I mean, a good combination, a healthy growth of both of them is super, super important. And we're going in that direction. I see everything going in that way. It's just, we have to rely, like I said, on private investments sometimes. And that's where, we have no control over, but we can be encouraging along these lines. Get it.
So if there's a consensus, we'll bring back this
Bring it
item
back.
as a formal resolution, and attached to the back of it will be a sample covenant or performance bond language that will be required of the developer to sign, so that you are assured that you will not be out any money.
That's the most important thing in the world right there. That's
Benchmarks.
It's in the contract.
Mayor,
just,
Mayor, if I may, before we move on off of this item, just want to thank William, also Brian Shields, our water utility director, and Ed Liberty, our electric utility director, that worked with William on putting this together. And I know Mike would share the same sentiments, that we've been excited since William brought forward this idea. and the creativity, and
they're
along,
giving.
yeah, and when you're along with you guys' leadership,
They're giving.
you know, we keep pushing and flipping over every leaf to ensure we're doing everything we can to for Lake Worth to prosper. So thank you, William and staff. I see Brian back there in the back.
And just to coincide with what Commissioner Robbins said earlier, I do want to look at some others alternative if we can outside of this in regards to the solar. You know what I mean? I think there's something in there that we can figure out. In fact, I have a couple of ideas, but I don't want to waste everyone's time with it right now. If we
And
can
Ed and I have been talking too, and there does need to be discussion on how we can encourage solar and the array of solar opportunities for the city, while at the same time not undermining and jeopardizing the future of electric utility.
Yes, exactly. And
Not
I
easy.
have some good ideas too. I want to sit down with you guys. All right, moving on to letter C. 3C. Discussion of transfer development rights program.
Okay, more creativity. I was sitting in a director's meeting probably about 6 months ago and listening and thinking about what challenges Lake Worth has in an array of things, trying to encourage investment, encouraging larger, more comprehensive projects. How can we generate more money for the city? The fact that we have aging infrastructure in terms of facilities and other mechanisms, and we only have a limited sales tax money, that's a one-time deal. So where could we potentially generate some revenue, provide an incentive for investment, and get a 2-for or a 3-for out of the same thing? So I propose that we adopt a transfer development right program whereby there are a number of cities that do this, and oftentimes it is transfers of development rights between or among private entity properties. Where this one actually originally started was I did a graduate paper on transfer development rights for Charlottesville, Virginia, because Charlottesville, the city, owned a lot of property that was in very advantageous areas, but the city didn't want to see that developed and wanted to see that development happen somewhere else. So I laid out this mechanism where the city could sell its development rights to private entities and those be transferred to those private entities' properties. So I was looking around at what we own, and we have a number of properties that we hold very dear. City Hall Annex, 1900, though it's not the prettiest building in the world. We have underutilized development potential that's likely not to be used. So my thought was we could sell from city-owned properties development potential to a developer that would allow them to do one of 3 things or a combination of all 3. One is to be able to add 10 units an acre to their project. Another would be to add an additional floor of no more than 15 feet, and also a mechanism to increase the floor area ratio of a project. That might be the hurdle that a developer might like to see to get the extra density, the extra floor, the extra height. The proposal here is an array of dollar values. Again, it would be market driven in the sense that we'd have to determine what those development rights are actually worth. But looking at some other municipalities, I feel in Lake Worth, $5 a square foot, which just happens to coincidentally equal what our sustainable bonus requirement is from a developer to add the additional floors into that program, that would be how it would work. And it has the potential, if it is popular, to generate a fairly healthy revenue stream to the city that could be used only for infrastructure and facilities improvements. And so that's what's proposed here is a comprehensive plan amendment that would be tacked on to the future land use and the sustainable bonus program, whereby the revenue generated from the sale of unutilized or underused city properties, and this has also limits. It does not facilitate the sale of all development potential of a city property, just a proportionate share of it that we don't think will be used. And there will be a market, there will be a bank created of these development rights, and a developer could utilize them and incorporate them in a project. Again, it would have to be a project that's either plan development, urban plan development, mixed plan development, or residential plan development. So it sounds pretty simple. Hopefully it'll work. And it'd be another toolbox in our array of things to encourage investment in the city.
Vice Mayor?
And just for the record, we are not selling any city property.
No.
We're selling the
Development
development
rights.
rights. Okay, I just wanted to make sure because
Explain
tomorrow
how
we'll
that
be
works,
selling
please.
City Hall.
Don't
And
where's the red sign?
How far does a project need to be away from the project to actually buy development rights? Do they have to be close to to one of these locations in order to buy development
Based
rights?
on the fact that our charter is situated the way it is, the only projects that likely could benefit from this are those that are west of Dixie Highway, where our charter allows a height of up to 100 feet. East of Dixie Highway, for the most part, the projects could not add the additional footage. They may choose to buy additional density. But I believe as I proposed this, it could only apply to projects that are actually west of Dixie Highway. You could open it up to east of Dixie Highway, but keep in mind that all they could buy is additional units per acre and additional FAR. They could not buy the additional height because the charter's already got that capped out.
And the west is where we're looking for new smart
And I
growth
think that a
anyway.
larger scale project will have a lesser of an impact on the overall charm and character of the city if it's west of Dixie versus east of Dixie.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hardy?
I'll go backwards. I'll start with the conversation that you were just having. If I'm not necessarily opposed to allowing more density east of Dixie Highway if it does not increase the height of the building and other things that make the building large, right? So like if we're not sacrificing, FAR or anything else, then I don't see why we couldn't make the development rights of our city properties available to projects east of Dixie Highway. If there's just a thought, if basically what that means is the building is the same size, but on the inside there are more units, then I don't really see what the problem would be with having more units there. And I think that would actually be advantageous for our downtown, especially given the conversation that we were just having about what I would consider urgent need for density in and around the downtown area to promote some of the things that we would like to have there. The other thing is, more broadly, I like the idea, right? I think things that have value, there should be a market for them. And you're creating a market here for something that has value where there isn't really a market. I just don't see a need to limit it to properties that the city owns. And what you mentioned was that in other cities where these program works, it's a market where everybody that has development rights, if you have properties and you have development rights that are unused, you can basically sort of securitize those development rights and put them out on the market and make them available for somebody else. I understand that we want the revenue. I think we also want the development activity. And if there's a way to increase the possibility that would occur, I think we should open it up for private entities to market their development rights as well and not just have a monopoly on that ourselves. I would worry about whether or not what we actually have is a market if we're the only seller, right?
Well, and you could get the reverse. If you have too much out there to sell, then likely the private sector will reduce the cost and the city will see no income itself. This is a selfish mechanism to benefit the city. Once these development rights are exhausted or the market drives up the value of them, we could always come back and amend the comp plan and say, okay, now we're going to open up the door to add another bank of development rights from the private sector. There is no market for this right now. It's going to be a test environment. So I felt that from a professional recommendation standpoint, we have as many as about 1 million square feet available among the city's properties that we could sell. 1 million square feet is 4 of the interstate commerce parks out in the commerce. It will probably be quite a while before someone will utilize 1 million square feet, adding an additional floor or additional units in their projects. So we fertilize the seed and let it get started. And as the market grows, we can always come back and add development rights from the private sector as a bank of available development rights.
I don't doubt what you're saying, right? So like what you're saying is that if the city is the only person who's allowed to sell the development rights, then there's a limited supply of development rights. And if there's a limited supply of development rights, therefore the price of the development rights would be very high. I get that argument, right? And that one good of having this is that the city would get benefit from, the financial benefit of selling its development rights and being the only person that's allowed to do this. I get that as well. The other benefit that I see is that projects that maybe don't work unless they have more square footage or more height or more, whatever, could be enabled by being able to buy these, right? And to me, that's the real thing. I would prefer, frankly, a long-term, stream of revenue that would come from having a city where we have lots of properties paying taxes, right? And so for me, the main benefit of this program isn't the fact that the city gets to make a bunch of money off of the development rights, but rather that here's a mechanism for making projects work that don't work otherwise, right? And so if you want to do that, if you want to make private projects work that wouldn't be able to work otherwise, wouldn't it behoove you to increase the supply and development rights to make these projects as economical as possible? Because the higher the price of the development rights, basically the less, the more costly the project.
Keep in mind that
on
the
other end.
cost of the development rights, when they're in the city's hands, you control that cost. You establish it irrespective of the market. So you've got basically 1.4 million square feet of development rights you could sell. The proposal is $5 a square foot. In the tabular information that was given to you, it did show a variety of different costs per square foot. You control that. And as that gets used up, again, I reiterate that you could go back and we could make a comp plan change, and I'd have to look in the Florida statutes, but we could create a secondary market after these get close to being exhausted that is driven by the private sector, of which we actually tax. And since it's our code, I don't know whether this is completely legal, but I'll find out. Let's say that the private sector does have a market and they're selling them. We are saying, well, you're allowing a private entity to facilitate development that's not normally approved under our code. Under that mechanism, we take a 20% take of that.
I think that's a much better structure.
But I need to look at that as a separate thing that may not be legal in Florida.
Okay, I certainly would like to see that, right? I think it would be better, first of all, to just have a large supply of development rights out there, and then for us to just take a slice, rather than us being the only seller of development rights. And I guess my last question would be...
keep in mind, too, that if we allow the private sector to sell, we may have properties that sell off their development rights from parcels we want to see developed versus their development rights being sold. Right now, we control the market.
That's what a market is.
Right, but if, let's just imagine there's a really amazing piece of property downtown. The developer's like, well, I'm here short-term Charlie. I want to sell off all my rights, and we have a vacant lot.
My last question will be, there are other cities that have transfer development rights. Did they start it off as you're suggesting we started off, or did they start it off a different way?
Ours is a little unique. What West Palm did is they geared their TDRs, that's transfer development rights, only from historic properties. You could transfer, and then they actually designated certain zones where those development rights could go. They have a larger market. In New York City, it was again geared toward preserving landmarks and development potential to various sending areas of the city. We don't have a large sending area to go from. We don't have a large area to borrow them from either. So we have a rather unique environment in the sense that we're rather small, and we want to see this development to happen in certain places. So it's a hybrid version of how it's been started in other communities.
Commissioner Robinson?
Two things. I don't want you to forget where I'd like the idea. I agree with Commissioner Hardy's interest in east of Dixie as well, South Federal Highway, again and again. The other point I would, or interest comment is my concern for nonprofit property. Would they be able to sell their churches?
Okay, right now, as
we're just talking
it's
about city.
Only coming from city properties.
City properties.
Okay.
In West Palm, all the church is actually mostly churches that have the development rights to transfer. Those have entities, though they don't pay taxes, have been able to generate a revenue stream to preserve and protect and enhance their historic sites. And so we're not proposing that necessarily, but granted, several of the properties in this little bank are like City Hall, which is historic, City Hall Annex, which is historic.
But the market, when Commissioner Hardy was talking about the market, expanding it to the market, that's where we get into the
We would not be able to limit it to just for-profit entities.
Yeah.
It would have to be available to any entity in the area where there would be development rights available to be bought.
Yeah.
I support moving forward with just the city pieces at this moment. If we were to look at doing anything in the future as a second phase, I'd be very concerned, like Mr. Robinson brought up, about the nonprofits, the amount of churches, the vacant land and or pieces that they have that could again be transferred but then sit empty, and especially in the downtown corridors, there's quite a few. So that's concerning to me. When you had originally said west of Dixie, I see the annexes on here. Would that not be good for, you know, like 101 North Federal, 101 South Federal, as development on those two corners?
Okay. Though the sending sites of the city are anywhere in the city. The City Hall Annex is definitely east of Dixie Highway. Under the comp plan incentives that are already in place, the only thing that properties east of Dixie Highway could benefit from is buying additional density.
Okay.
Because you can already get almost at the height that's in the charter, which is 65 feet.
So we're really talking west of Dixie.
Yes.
And again, I really think that you need to just state in layman's terms, not William speak,
Okay.
the process in which this happens, because just, people are gonna be confused just after what the vice mayor said when he was talking about the annex building and height and this and that. We're not talking about our buildings.
No.
All right, I need you to specify exactly, explain if you could, just for people at home, what it means.
There is zoning, and most of them are P, which allows a certain FAR, which is floor area ratio, which allows a certain
Again, more layman speak.
Well, I'm getting there.
Okay.
A certain amount of square footage to be built on a piece of property.
Right. So I am Mrs. Smith. I've got a new name, and I own a property. Where do I own a property? Just give me an example.
Are we trying to buy some to put on your property?
I want to build on my property on
You're on
South Federal Highway.
You're on, okay, you're on, well, let's not use South Federal Highway.
Okay,
It's
North
more
Dixie
complicated.
Highway.
Why not?
You're at 1001 North Dixie Highway.
There you go.
And you have been looking at a property and you would like to be able to do an additional floor and possibly additional 10 units per your acre.
Okay.
You come to the city, in the bank of development rights, we still own all of our properties. All we've done is transfer some of the development potential from these sites to this bank, which has an array of, let's say it's got 60,000 square feet from City Hall that's not going to be used, 20,000 square feet of the City Hall Annex. The 1900 Second Avenue is the largest one. All those sites have undeveloped potential. So that's been in the bank.
So now we see this on our spreadsheet here.
Yes.
And it says, okay, square footage available. City Hall is 66,805. Second Avenue is 1,185,915,000.
Right.
Okay. So now I'm Mrs. Smith, and I want to build my property, and I want that extra floor, and I want that.
So depending on how large your floor is, let's say there's 10,000 square foot floor plates. The additional floors, you want to buy 10,000 square feet from the city. You will go to the bank. Is there 10,000 square feet available in the bank? Yes, there would be. And based on the cost, which I'm proposing at this point, would be $10 a square foot. It could be reduced as much as $5, but I think 10 is a good market number to work with. You'd be paying the city $100,000 for those rights. You write out a check to the city, you come through as a plan development. It all gets codified in the ordinance creating the plan development.
Now, what do they actually own at the end of all those?
Air rights.
Air rights. So they don't have any.
They don't own any additional land. They don't own any city land. They don't own any city buildings.
Any city buildings? No, nothing. No,
City
nothing.
didn't sell anything.
So he didn't sell anything. Okay. Isn't it the same as impact fees?
No.
Well, I mean, when you used to build something or whatever, and you wanted to get up, you wanted to get extra height or extra far or extra whatever. And back in the day, didn't you used to pay? Couldn't you pay X amount of dollars in a city to get?
Okay, that's a little bit different. There were concurrency payments that could be made by a developer that related, and people have intersposed concurrency payments and impact fees. Let's say that you wanted to come and you wanted to build so many houses somewhere in the county, and the school wasn't ready for it. The county would say, you must pay this much to the roadway program, this much to this school board in order to make sure that the facilities were in a state that could handle the new development. We've already given quite a bit of development opportunity to an individual. We're saying if you want to go extra than what is allowed under the comp plan or the LDRs, you can buy it from us.
Didn't we once have a plan? I remember when Commissioner Zerdy was here at the time when we talked about if you landscape or if you do, and there was he would propose something, one from column A, two from column B, or
well, that was in the discussions of making the Sustainable Bonus Incentive Program, which we already have, a little more complicated than what it is.
Okay.
But it gets back to the fact that in the discussions and generating the comp plan and the LDRs, the community felt comfortable with that. For the most part, two-story development could happen very, very easily. As projects got bigger, there was a desire to have more of an impact related to the public realm. Either the project should have more value per square foot, it should be energy efficient, it should be sustainable, it should be creative, it should add more to the tax base than it would normally just by right. And then in our comp plan, we've also put in the mechanism to actually jump a little bit farther. If you want a larger project than normally would be allowed, you have to do this, that, and the other under the Sustainable Bonus Program. This is another piece that allows a developer to bank and know exactly what their cost is going to be. If I want to go from 5 stories to 6 stories, I'm going to have to pay this amount of money to buy those rights from the city, and I move forward. Impact fees are, there has to be a rational nexus between the charge that's being expended, because you can have impact fees for recreation, for art and public places, for schools, for roads, whatever.
Correct. I'm asking this is my method for explaining the difference, because people are confused about, well, aren't we paying for this here in this way? Or how is that different from in the LDRs? Or how is that different from the comp plan? I'm just trying to make sure that it's all laid out there so people understand the difference. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Hardy?
Yeah, so.
And again, nobody owns the buildings.
We own the buildings, the city owns the buildings.
There you go.
If you wanted the city to still be able to make revenue off of this, you could open it up to private landowners if you took a slice of what they would sell.
I don't know that for sure.
If it's legal, then that's something that we could explore. No?
Yes.
Okay. And then your concern is that, well, what if there are areas of the city where we really want to be developed, right? And as you say, Johnny short term owns this piece of property and he's just going to sell the development rights, right? And we're going to lose out on an opportunity to develop a piece of property because forever the value or what could be done would be forever truncated at that property. That would be a concern, right? Could you just draw a line around stuff that you don't want the development potential to be sold off of? And say, you know, if you're going to sell your development rights, you have to be outside of this core area that we deem to be really important, like the downtown or like Dixie Highway. For example, you can only receive or purchase development rights if you're on Dixie Highway or in the downtown. You can't sell it.
The areas that are most likely to have development rights available to be transferred are in fact those areas we want to see redeveloped. 10th Avenue North, 6th Avenue South, Dixie Highway, Federal Highway. The one captured market that has undeveloped or unrealized potential that we know is not going to be needed is on city property. We can't like spot zone and say, well, these 4 properties can't sell their development potential, but their neighbors could.
Well, that wouldn't necessarily be spot zoning because it would be more than one property.
A argument really could be made that if, you know, my neighbors can sell their property rights, but I can't, and I'm in the same zoning district and I'm on the same street and I'm in the same environment, they might have a very strong legal challenge to challenge that ability. So that, again, what I'm recommending is we move forward with the city option, see how it goes, do some more research, see how the market evolves, and we can come back and broaden it and create a more private sector driven one at a later date. But we, with $1.5 million potential development square feet available, the city, since I've been here, I do not believe has added that much square footage to the overall footprint of the city.
Sure.
So $1.5 million is a really large bank of development rights that probably would take us 5, possibly 10 years to sell. And that gives us plenty of time to study how best to utilize and make a private sector market work and still be beneficial for the city.
Can you bring that back?
What?
Can you come back with this with the fleshed out part that Commissioner Hardy had asked for in reference to the legal?
Yeah, I can have a legal question answered, and I can work with the city attorney's office to do that.
I just, you know, we have a pattern of doing things in a very unique way here when other cities have already done these things. And they've been successful doing these things, and they've done them in a way that's very different from what's being proposed here. But what's being presented, it's being presented as if it's the only way that we can do it. And we know that it's been done elsewhere in a different way. And so I just, look, you know, there are other cities that do exactly, I'm just not going to get to that.
There are other cities that are in a different position than we are. and I'm not denigrating Lake Worth. Lake Worth is economically challenged. We have got to figure out an incentivized way to encourage investment, but also provide a revenue stream to the city, because much of our new development is going to be in the CRA. It does not help your general fund at all. And we have infrastructure that is decaying. Our city facilities are in disastrous shape. This is a way to hopefully have win-wins, in the sense that developers will be incentivized to invest more in the city. They will hopefully create projects that have a stronger tax base for the city, and there will be a revenue stream for you all to have to invest in your city's facilities, because they are in dire shape. And no matter how you look at it, the penny sales tax money is a one-time thing, and there's only so much of it.
Okay. Thank you, William. Appreciate it. Anything else on the agenda? I've lost my agenda. Nope. I want to thank everyone for their hard work today. Again, to city staff and to Brian and to the electric utilities and William and your staff and Dolores and everybody involved in this. Mark, everybody, look for these items to come back. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Hardy, seconded by the Vice Mayor. All those in favor state so by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very, very much. Good conversation.